everyone in healthcare realizes it's got to become more efficient. And a lot of that is on the payer side. I'm on the provider side, but I realize that payers, particularly Medicare Advantage plans, have got to be part of the solution, but they cannot be making the margins they're making and squeezing it all from the providers and have the system continue to function. So it's a balance there, and they've got to be involved in the solution.
The business of healthcare is hard, creating a badlands of terrain that is difficult to navigate. Some think the most brilliant minds in business are on Wall Street. They are wrong. The most brilliant minds are in healthcare. They have to be to thrive and survive. This podcast explores concepts in leadership, management, sales, and negotiation with those brilliant minds. The Healthcare Badlands podcast is generally planned, but unscripted, unedited, and uncut, so you get the honest and unfiltered experience. Your host is Dr. Tom McDougall, a 30-year veteran of healthcare with 23 years of hospital CEO experience. His guests are carefully selected experts from across the industry. They offer insights, expertise, and some great real-life, often hilarious stories. Now, let's jump into the episode.
Colin Luke is a partner at Holland & Knight, a prominent and influential healthcare law firm in the Southeast with impact across the country. Colin's one of the reasons for their success, and many consider him to be the go-to attorney for contentious healthcare legal battles, mergers and acquisitions, and CON matters. Colin has a Juris Doctorate from the University of Chicago Law School and a Bachelor of Science from Vanderbilt University. I've had the honor of being across the table as well as on the same side of the table from Colin, and I can attest he is a formidable opponent and ally. Colin, welcome to the podcast.
Well, thanks very much, Tom. You're very kind, and I probably don't deserve all of that, but I've always enjoyed working with you. You're a gentleman and a scholar and a worthy adversary and a great client when we work together. So
and see, that's what makes you a great attorney, is you've got that BS you can throw in there.
They teach you that in first year law school.
Yeah, I always say I have a BS degree from Samford University.
Yes.
All right, let's jump into a few questions I've got for you. As I mentioned, many consider you to be one of the best healthcare attorneys in the Southeast, and definitely you've had some impact in a very long career. How has healthcare law evolved during your career?
Well, I'm fortunate to have gotten involved in healthcare law in its infancy when things were much simpler, and it did not take the degree of analysis or the teams that we would use today. Start and I kick back just mergers and acquisitions and the size of health systems. And right now, margins are so thin in the healthcare world, whether it's on the physician practice level or the hospital level, in most cases, that you've got to make sure the legal analysis works with the economic analysis. And we've all learned that sometimes you have to take risks, but it's prudent risks, business risks, and not legal risks. It's a great profession for young lawyers starting out because it's ever changing. We've seen that in the last few months. Almost every week there's been a major healthcare pronouncement, and clients have to react or be prepared for upcoming change. And so the pace of change is much greater, and then the size of the healthcare industry is much greater. And we've seen a lot of new types of providers with new types of regulations. So it's not an area where you can just rest on your laurels. You've got to keep up with the change. And governmental policy has such an impact on healthcare, particularly hospitals, providers of all sizes, physicians, that you've got to integrate more than ever a policy component of your practice and sort of see around the corner if you're going to be advising your clients most effectively. It's a challenge, and that's good for most lawyers that like that, and fortunate to have long-term clients, and they appreciate that you're a partner with them, want them to succeed, and most importantly, take care of their patients in the best possible manner and still have a margin that supports their mission or a return to their investors if they're investor-owned.
Yeah, you brought up the financial side. I'm curious how that might have changed over the last 2 or 3 decades. Have you had to, essentially, grow your skills or grow your team to be able to address a lot of the financial pieces as well as the legal pieces when you're advising your client?
For sure. We have 400 plus healthcare lawyers, and we're the largest in the country in terms of pure healthcare lawyers. And many of us have become increasingly specialized and have to understand the business aspects of the healthcare industry. And it's not possible to do that without good partners. We work increasingly with consultants, with CPAs, and with the CFOs, a number of our clients, and try to craft a solution that works, achieves our clients' objectives of a bottom line, and to have the resources to reinvest. Capital costs are enormous, and margins are very thin. So we're trying to stay ahead of the curve and make sure we understand the business and not just the legal issues that are involved. It's very challenging for most people in the healthcare industry, and it is a difficult industry, but one we've got to have. We can't export it. And most communities, if they don't have a viable hospital, are having a really difficult time on economic development and attracting young people to their communities. So it's something as a nation, particularly as we age, we've got to have, and it's our job to help support it economically and legally. Specialization, we have people that will specialize in every aspect of healthcare on the provider side. And there's so many new types of providers: acute care at home, infusion being delivered at home, and of course, healthcare is moving to the outpatient sector, and more services that used to be inpatient only are being delivered at an outpatient setting.
Very interesting. What about the involvement of municipalities? Have you seen, kind of these, and I'm not talking about a municipality that owns a hospital, but one that is essentially a community stakeholder, but not a, fiscally involved organization. Have you seen rises in municipalities being more interested and more influential on strategies and even potentially legal issues with healthcare organizations?
We've seen, you said outside of financial support, but a number of municipalities and counties have passed taxes to support their local hospital, and they know they can't survive or to pay for indigent care. A number of them realize that without that support, they're probably not going to have a long-term viable health system. And a lot of their employees need health care, and all of them at some point. And so they're investing in the community, but they also see it as an economic development project, that even just recruiting 2 orthopedic surgeons to a rural area, I mean, that's an economic incentive program in itself. So they want to be involved. They're sitting down at the table when a surgeon is coming to visit, or a pediatrician is coming to visit, and say, this is a great community, come start your practice here. Or if it's a hospital, what kind of equipment do you need? We don't have tons of money, but we'll support your efforts to bring in the latest technology so you're not having to leave the area. And then if it's a large community, it's making sure that there's coordination among the various providers and that all segments of the community have access to healthcare. That it all can't be about the affluent and insured, and you've got to worry about preventive care and the underinsured or no insurance patients, that the community has to work together to really make sure it's taken care of.
That's an excellent point. I know those of us in healthcare appreciate and understand the economic impact of healthcare in any community, but I've had the honor of working in a number of communities over the years where we were the largest employer, with the exception of governmental employers. And it would turn into a question about the, financial health and viability of the organization, even though we were a private organization. But it was funny to me where the municipalities didn't show more interest at times in the financial health of our organization because we were such an economic driver for that entire community and market.
I think
But they
that's
get
changing because we've had so many hospital and health system bankruptcies and closures, particularly in rural areas or urban settings, that they realize that's losing an industry, that's losing a big source of workers and helping our community compete and take care of its citizens. So I think increasingly you're seeing mayor, city council members, even for-profit hospitals, wanting to be partners and to see what they can do to enhance healthcare, work with them, and not just take it for granted that there's always going to be a hospital or a group of physicians, specialists, or pediatricians, or psychiatrists, which are in huge demand. They're going to have to work alongside the hospital and see what they can do to help.
Yeah, I've become concerned because I heard somebody say, and they were kind of ancillary to healthcare. They didn't actually work in healthcare, but they made a comment last year to me about that it was almost like the boy that cried wolf. You know, every 12 to 18 months, there's a report about the number of hospitals that potentially could close. And this person, you know, looked at me and said, you know, we hear that all the time, but then very few of them actually close. And I was trying to explain to him, they're not crying wolf. They are pulling, you know, rabbits out of their hats in many circumstances just to be able to continue operations. But I strongly encouraged him not to, you know, think along the lines of, you know, that it's not as bad as it is, because it's tenuous. And I think most organizations, yeah. Well, and most organizations, you know, hospitals, it's not unusual to run a 2% margin. And there are very few businesses in the world that would find a 2% margin even vaguely acceptable. But we have a lot of healthcare organizations. That's exactly where they are. So
and are having
concerning.
very expensive capital equipment requirements. How do you pay for that if your margin's 2% or no margin?
Yeah.
There's a lot of
in many
governmental...
many circumstances you don't. You end up with that MRI unit that is 8 years old and beyond its useful life.
Obsolete. And so that causes patients to leave and go to the bigger community or your competing hospital. And it's a vicious cycle. So.
Yeah, it's definitely tough. All right, I do have a curious question for you. What is the most interesting or bizarre healthcare issue or challenge that you've faced over your decades of work in healthcare?
Probably one of the big healthcare CON battles between two major healthcare systems. And there was actually a third that was involved in opposition. It was a 5-year fight. And it's now CHS's flagship in Birmingham, Grandview. And it's just, it was all hands on deck. Long term, we changed the CON legislation in Alabama to streamline the process going forward because it was so horrible. And we had a lot of PR support. We did crazy things like green light, red light on the outside of the hospital, which was on a major highway, and try to get the community support saying we need this. We had neighborhoods involved. And there were some complex legal issues about relocating the hospital and moving forward. So that's one. Thankfully, the hospital is up and running and very successful, so you feel good every time you pass it. And knowing a lot of people are getting great care, and that wouldn't have happened unless we'd had a successful outcomes.
Yeah. Well, you'll like this story because in the middle of that big battle, and it went on forever, and of course you're familiar with the Alabama Hospital Association. Well, the Birmingham Council of the Hospital Association is arguably the most active, and I'm not criticizing any of the other councils. It's just a very active, very involved council, and we would meet on a really regular basis for 2 or 3 hours most months. And I'll never forget, I was sitting with the CEO of what's now Grandview one day at one of those lunches, and it had gotten contentious. And, you know, we had the CEOs of the two battling organizations in the same room every month together. And everybody was super professional and everybody got along great, but there was just this undercurrent, this feel of the contentiousness. And the CEO of the facility that would become Grandview, he leaned over to me and he said, Tom, he said, I really appreciate you sitting here with me today. And I thought about it for a second and I leaned back to him and I said, yeah, and next month I'm going to be sitting on the other side of the room. He just looked at me and I said, buddy, I run one of the other hospitals in the community and I appreciate that both of you have real strong opinions about the outcome of this CON battle, but I still have an organization to run and I'm interested in which one of you wins this battle, but it's not going to change what I'm doing and it's not going to change our strategy. So it's just very interesting.
Nasty battle. I remember both of the CEOs spoke at Rotary, and then one filed a complaint with Rotary saying the other was given more time and allowed to present his case in a more aggressive manner. So it just
I never heard that. That's
yes.
Awesome.
Well, that's serious. So you got to maintain your professional demeanor as a hospital administrator, CEO, but then you got to fight it out.
Yeah, you do, and you got to fight the battle with it. The public perception is the two organizations are warring, and the CEOs don't like each other. But in reality, healthcare leaders, we all pretty much get along. We may disagree on a legal battle, we may disagree on a certificate of need outcome or something like that, but we all get along. Shane Spees and I battled for 2 years here in Birmingham. And I like Shane. I traded text with him the other day. I don't know if he likes me as much as I like him, but we never had a cross word through all of that, even though we were battling for something that was important for both of our organizations. But it's a small ecosystem, and I always have said that in healthcare you're really no more than 2 degrees of separation from every other healthcare leader. And if you get down to a smaller region, such as the Southeast, you're really only 1 degree of separation. We all know each other, or we know somebody who does know that person.
No question. It's a close-knit community. Many executives went to the same healthcare administration program, and they knew each other then, but then they've got to represent their separate organizations. I think everyone understands that. They've got a different view sometimes on how to achieve healthcare objectives, but they believe that each adversary is capable of an organization and could be a friend in many cases. They just have to agree to disagree. So the same could be in a merger where your competing system is acquiring another hospital, and you may be trying to seek antitrust review and stop it, but you still know that the person that's doing it is doing it for the right reasons, and you got to get along. And you got to work together there. You may be cooperating on emergency room diversion, on some joint programs that you can do. And you got to look, and certainly in the pandemic, we saw competitors that had a lot of difficulties or disagreements in the past working together in the best interest of the community. We all have to pull together for that. So.
Oh, absolutely. Well, you never know when you're going to need each other.
Correct.
You have their healthcare organization faces challenges, but at some point you're going to be sharing challenges. So having those relationships, having those communication channels open. I can remember at the beginning of the pandemic, I was in a market where there was some disagreement between the healthcare organizations. It had gotten contentious on several levels. I was kind of Switzerland at that point, sitting in the middle of it. So I was the one that organized all of the hospital CEOs that were in that region. I organized them to get on the phone once or twice a week, every week. And they got along great, even though they had significant disagreements, because ultimately we're all there for the exact same reason, and it's the patients. We may be battling from a competitive perspective to earn the trust of those patients, but we're all there for the same patients.
Of course. And in a crisis like that, you've got to come together, and the healthcare community did. Physicians, hospitals, other allied providers.
Yeah, absolutely. This episode is sponsored by Audrey Health. Many hospitals rely on their employed primary care network for referrals. However, this comes at a cost as most hospitals operate these same networks on negative margins. Audrey Health is an innovative solution to eliminate these operating losses while maintaining the referrals. Learn more at audreyhealth.com. A link is provided in today's episode notes. So let's talk about the future. So you've mentioned a couple of healthcare challenges that have been along the way, but what do you see coming down the pipe? So where are the healthcare challenges that are of the future, and what kind of themes are you hearing from various healthcare executives across different organizations about their concerns?
Most healthcare executives are very focused on what's happening in Washington. Rapid change every week. There's a major announcement just had in the last few days, a major announcement about CMMI on innovation for Medicare. That a number of those programs are going to be discontinued because they're costing too much money. But if you built systems to align with those particular programs that they pushed, you've got to then dismantle it if actually the program goes away. Concerned about Medicaid funding and how that's going to change, and then provider-based site neutrality issues that a lot of hospitals and health systems are focused on the advantages they have on reimbursement that covers a lot of their indigent care, their entitled obligations. And if everyone's paid the same, regardless whether they're in a hospital or an outpatient setting, that is going to be a financial challenge for a hospital or health system that has built up an infrastructure to support inpatient care. I think 340B, another area where most people think there are going to be significant challenges. And if you're a nonprofit or safety net hospital, that's where you can make a margin and cover some of your other costs. And I think without it, a number of them would have to really scale back their infusion or medical oncology services. So I think we'll see major healthcare policy battles over site neutrality and 340B and how Medicaid reform gets out. I think everyone in healthcare realizes it's got to become more efficient, and a lot of that is on the payer side. I'm on the provider side, but I realize that payers, particularly Medicare Advantage plans, have got to be part of the solution, but they cannot be making the margins they're making and squeezing it off of the providers and have the system continue to function. So it's a balance there, and they've got to be involved in the solution. I think they've really been focused on pre-authorizations, particularly for post-acute care services, and that has driven some of those services to the point of closure. LTACs, for instance, if you have a high percentage of Medicare Advantage as opposed to traditional Medicare, you probably can't make an LTAC work even in a large community because they can't get prior authorization for that service. And so then where do those patients go? So a lot of challenges. Labor costs are a big problem. One of the things that came out of the pandemic, our nurses, as you know well, Tom, are traveling for big dollars. That's subsided to some extent, but it's hard for them to go from a really high hourly rate back to sort of pre-pandemic norms. I don't think you can ever do that. People are driving for another $5-10 an hour in many aspects of healthcare, and those costs right now are unrecoverable in most cases. And so after the pandemic funding has gone, we still got high labor costs in a competitive environment, but you don't have the extra reimbursement. So where you are on the wage index, many southern states and rural states have low Medicare wage indexes, which means they're providing the same service to Medicare beneficiaries for a whole lot less money. There are hospitals on the border in some southern states that could just pick themselves up and move 20 miles across the border. Their Medicare funding would be 30 or 40% more. And that they're competing for the same patients, they're competing for the same employees. So that's really hard. And that's extremely difficult to make a change in the wage index at a statewide. So all these, you could count tons of challenges. There are opportunities, and the industry will survive. Hospitals will survive, but a number of changes are going to be made, and I think everyone more than ever is going to have to be focused on what's happening in Washington, to a lesser extent at the state capitals. But this is going to be 4 years of rapid change and adjustment, and I think hospitals are going to do well and have to react quickly to some of those changes.
Yeah, and you bring up an exceptionally valid point, is that, and that's one of the reasons this podcast was created, is I contend that the most brilliant minds in business are in healthcare because of the challenges you're mentioning. And, a facility that I was operating from 2019 to 2023, we saw a 38% increase in our average hourly wage. 38%. And
your reimbursement certainly didn't go up.
No, and that was the problem, is that, we're not making burgers. So I can't just change the price of our cheeseburgers that we're selling and increase it by 20% to offset half of the increase that I experienced in wages. Can't do that. Medicare and Medicaid reimbursement is not going to dramatically change. You may get a small wage basket adjustment, but it's low single digits as opposed to 38% increase over a 3-year period. And then, I've had people point out to me, well, what about the private insurance companies? The Aetna, the Blue Cross, the United. Well, yes, there's potential for negotiation, but you also are negotiating usually under somewhere between a 2, 3, or 4-year contract, and they don't want to renegotiate mid-contract. And so then you're trying to negotiate at the end, and you're not going to see a 30% increase. If you provide a lot of data and you work hard, you may be able to get a 5 to 10% increase, which helps, but it's still a problem. And those healthcare executives overcoming those challenges, it's fascinating to me to watch them do it because they figure it out. They have a curveball thrown at them and they figure it out again. They're brilliant.
The costs of failure are too great. They're going to make it work. Yeah. The other challenge they're facing, I know you're aware of this, is that a lot of hospital-based physicians, anesthesiologists, particularly radiologists, and hospitalists are requiring major subsidies for services that were formerly just independently billed and the hospital didn't have to subsidize. But they're in many cases 7, for large systems, 8 figures of annual subsidies that a year ago you weren't paying anything. And it's because there's extreme shortages. There are 3 vacancies for every new radiology graduate. At some point, maybe AI catches up and some of those services can be performed by AI, but until that, because a lot of physicians are choosing not to go into radiology, they're just too few to go around to cover the readings, and that falls to the hospital. Then they've got to have the service to remain open. Someone doing an interpretation saying as many hospitals have moved to a hospital service, and in emergency medicine, a number of those providers have gone out of business. So it is a huge challenge, and that's, I think, causing consolidation in many cases, that they feel like they cannot cope with some of these items unless they're part of a larger system, so they can get some economies of scale, or have their own kind of roving band of radiologists that can be their Nighthawks or provide services across state lines, those kind of things. Physicians have been cut enormously by Medicare. If you look at the real dollar reimbursement for Medicare, and many are opting out of Medicare, certainly Medicaid, and they're not at the moment getting any fixes in their reimbursement. In real, it's a 30 to 40% actual decrease over the last 20 years in real dollar terms. So very hard for them to take Medicare patients unless they have high dollar commercial insurance to make up the difference.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely correct. And that hasn't gotten a lot of discussion because of the wages, the inflation, but you're correct. The hospital-based physicians coming to the hospital wanting major increases in subsidy. But it was that triple whammy effect. It was the It was the higher inflation. So they're getting impacted just like every business is getting impacted.
course.
But then if they're carrying any debt, most of it was at some level variable, whether it was a quarterly adjustment or an annual adjustment. But the debt service increase costs that they were experiencing. And then the third piece was the No Surprise Billing Act, because you did have some of these hospital-based physician groups that were benefiting because a significant margin was able to be gained from just a couple of insurance payers. And whether we like it or not, the No Surprise Billing Act was a big favor done for the insurance companies, because if I have to be in network or I have to accept in network rates as a physician group, I have no negotiating leverage, zero. And so you're going to accept what you get offered, and suddenly your margins are cut by, as much as, 4 to 5 times. You could have a major decrease in your margins from that particular payer. So when all three of those things hit at the same time, yes, it was a regular stream of physicians coming in my office wanting to get adjustments to the subsidies or get a subsidy when they haven't had subsidies in decades.
It's a problem. One thing that's impressed me about hospital administrators and physicians, particularly large practices, they're always looking for the opportunities with change to make a margin to cover some of their no margin or negative margin services. But then as those get eliminated, then at some point it just doesn't add up. I've seen a lot of hospitals eliminate labor and delivery, and that's a crisis. Probably have to be a new model for dealing with labor and delivery, as those are money losers, high liability, and not great reimbursement, and difficulty getting coverage in many cases for the service. And if you're a rural community and you don't have labor and delivery services, that's a crisis. People are traveling 2-3 hours to get a baby delivered. But there's got to be some medium or high margin opportunities in healthcare for the providers if they're going to be expected to cover no margin services and to continue to provide the level of indigent care that they're providing, and that's investor-owned or governmental or not-for-profit. A lot of these issues are the same.
No, you're absolutely correct. And then you mentioned earlier the changes coming out of Washington. They're fast and furious. Whether and we're recording this in March of 25, there's just wide ranging. Even the media has their head spinning because there's so many changes coming out of it. But I always worry in times like this, because if you want to paralyze a healthcare executive, you introduce uncertainty about the future. If they don't know what the future looks like, I'm not talking about next month, I'm talking about next year, 5 years from now, it's very difficult to make decisions, because the healthcare executives are making decisions based on what they are anticipating. And a lot of these major changes, they don't just happen overnight. So hopefully, whether you agree or disagree with what's going on in Washington, hopefully that calms down to where there's a little bit more certainty about what the future looks like so that decisions can be made. The hospital at home, acute care model, the question about the waiver has created some challenges. And for the last few months, I've been seeing healthcare executives sitting on their hands where they think maybe that's a possibility for my organization in the future. They're doing nothing because they don't know what the future holds for the program.
Until there's some certainty. I think in the end, the changes will not be as significant from a reimbursement standpoint as some people fear. And there'll be some opportunities that are created, but it's going to be extremely challenging period, I think, as you work through these issues and things get sorted out. We have hired 6 former members of Congress, bipartisan, to try to help our clients work through all that. Most recently, we hired Dr. Larry Gouchon, who's a cardiac surgeon who served in Congress in leadership role. And that was really because our clients are saying, what is going to happen? Help me look around the corner. And we feel like, lobbyists that have members of Congress that really focused on healthcare and what can be done. They're saying, calm down, things are going to work out in the long run, have a seat at the table and come up and be part of the solution, and not just opposing everything, but there are opportunities that are out there. And there's enormous political support for healthcare industry on the provider side, and to harness that and to realize that you got to educate members of Congress and state legislators about healthcare, the impact of the community, what it needs, and be realistic and be a partner, I think is the way forward.
Absolutely. Well, I mentioned in your introduction that I consider you an expert in certificate of need, and you've been in a lot of CON battles nationwide. There's been some pretty significant changes in some states in terms of CON laws, whether those have been rolled back or they've been continued. A decision to continue is just as significant as a decision to reduce the CON law impact. How have you seen that impacting healthcare organizations, and what do you see kind of as the future on a nationwide basis regarding CON?
I think it's about half and half. Maybe 26 states have repealed their CON system, which was created basically when healthcare was cost-based reimbursed to stop the expansion and have the government pay for it. But once we moved to prospective payment, there's not the same need. But there have been some real examples of where CON might have been helpful in healthcare. For instance, Texas has no CON system, and it's the Wild West. You can build one hospital right across the street from the other, good and bad. But the problem is overbuilding on services that might not be viable because the costs are so high if you've got too many of them. For instance, there's one exit in Houston on the interstate that has more PET scanners than the whole city and the province surrounding in Toronto. So the population, it's easy to get a PET scan. Many of those facilities, the freestanding emergency departments or imaging centers, are physician owned and part of the practice. And so they've got a huge debt service, so they've got to prescribe and market their services. You can see billboards, get a PET, and there's a price in our location, which most of us don't like that level of commercialism in healthcare. So it's competitive that hopefully drive costs down, but if you have too much duplication, you're going to have overutilization. Tennessee repealed its CON system for home health agencies, but then put it back on because there was this proliferation and they had to undo what they did. But Florida has moved away almost completely from certificate of need. And so it's a balance. It depends. I think most states have streamlined the system. Our own state, Alabama, has done that. Georgia has done that. So I think you don't need 5-year, 7-year battles over healthcare facilities. If you have a review and there's a balance there focused on policy and avoiding duplication and not just spending money to keep up with the competitors where it's not economically viable. If the government is going to support it in a tax or in a appropriation, then I think they want to make sure it's going to be viable for the long term. So it's a balance. I think there are policy arguments in pro and con. I think our own agency in Alabama does a great job balancing it out and has physician leadership, which has been very positive. And then other states, they understand it's just let the best entity win, and whatever happens, happens. We're going to stay out of it. Texas being the other extreme, I think.
Yep, and I heard somebody say one time that the only constant in healthcare is change.
That's good for lawyers. It's bad for hospital administrators. So it's not a commodity industry. And healthcare is local. So much depends on the local culture and what the preferences are, the physician community, those kind of things. So it's not a one size fits all model.
Yeah. Excellent. Well, Colin, this has been very insightful. I really appreciate you investing time to talk with me today, and certainly wish you the best in the future.
Well, you too, Tom. I hope we have an opportunity to work together. And you're an expert, I know. You've been through all these things where it really counts and making it work. So my hats off to you as other hospital administrators. Thanks for the great job you do and have done. And you're part of the solution and coming up with long-term strategies that work.
Excellent. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tom. Appreciate it.
Thank you for listening to the Healthcare Badlands podcast. As always, please like and subscribe so you don't miss future episodes. If you have suggestions for topics or guests, please email those to podcast@badlands.pro. This podcast is for informational and entertainment purposes only and should not be considered legal advice. Some information shared may include fictitious names. The opinions expressed are solely those of the host and/or guests and are their own and not reflective of the opinions of others or our sponsors. Thanks again for listening, and we hope you'll join us on the next episode of the Healthcare Badlands podcast. Until then,